For Diablo 4 Season 9, although the Necromancer might not be as much in the spotlight as the Spiritborn and the Hydra Sorcerer, if you prefer summoning skeletons, especially rather than like Hydras, then the Skeletal Mage Summoner is actually quite strong indeed this season. And for this quick build guide, I'm gonna just go through the most important things to collect as well as look out for to succeed at this build. For the other smaller details, a lot of it is also just very standard minion necromancer type stuff, but for that you can also check out the link in the description box below for the character planner. So real quick, let me first go through some of the build's key strengths and weaknesses and just what to look out for when playing it. So with this, the reason that I quite like it is that these skeletal mages do have a very high ceiling to scale to, of course relying on the new Hand of Naz unique item. The damage scaling can really go really high, especially if you ramp up your skeletal mastery and are able to get the right runes to buff up. So in a sense, damage and damage scaling isn't lacking on this build, but the one thing that I will say that is kind of holding this build back a little bit from being like absolute S tier compared to the other like thriving builds in the season is just the fact that this is still a minion build, and with a minion build comes with some of the struggles like not being able to directly command your skeletons for who to attack, right? And that means you kind of have to play a little bit back, especially if you're pushing like a bit harder content, say pits or escalating nightmare dungeons even. And just your survivability alone, since you also don't have skeletal warriors or a golem, can be a bit precarious, can be a bit tough. So that's why I chose to, that's why I opted for using Blood Mist for one of my skills. Although this is kind of a flex pick and kind of a personal preference. In the past, survivability came from Soul Rift because it also granted barrier, so necromancers were a lot tankier before, but now in this season, Soul Rift no longer grants barrier, so you just have to play pretty carefully, especially since after your skeletal mages die, you have to resummon them, right? So you kind of want to not use up all of your corpses on the field as well, in pits especially, so that just in case you die, you'll still have enough corpses left over to be able to resummon your skeletons. Another thing to watch out for a lot is that if you look closely at the Hand of Naz, which again this build is heavily reliant on for damage, is that your skeletal mages actually don't start as skeletal archmages. So these archmages are like the powered up versions that deal like AoE and like increased damage, but you'll notice that they actually only power up into the archmages by attacking 25 times without dying, right? You don't have to worry about survivability of these mages actually, because as long as you pair, as long as you have the service and sacrifice aspect, your skeletal mages are going to be taking like very little damage anyway, so their survivability is not a concern. However, for example, if you're starting out a fresh pit, like a higher tier pit, that's a bit challenging. You'll want to actually allow your skeletal mages to ramp up first at the very beginning of the dungeon, so that you have a significant number of them becoming skeletal archmages before you really start to aggressively push into the depths of that pit or dungeon. With that, let's get into skills really quickly first before I go through gear and other things. I'll do this pretty quickly because a lot of the points here on the skill tree are just very standard necromancer stuff. I'll explain some of the flex picks especially, but for the rest of the details, because it's so standard across like most necromancer, especially minion builds, you're just taking like the maximum like amount of damage and having some resource sustain and stuff like that. I'm not gonna go through every single detail, and you can check that out in the character planner in the description. Anyhow, let's start with Reap. This is very standard, even though I don't have it on my bar. And then the corpse generation, Hued Flesh is really good for this build. You'll generally want to max it out. Supernatural Blight is helpful because it increases damage and adds another shadow spell. And I'll explain why shadow spells are good. But again, this is like standard across necromancers. Anyhow, Supernatural Blight is good. Whenever you attack an enemy with it, you can get like extra damage to them. Next, I personally like having Blood Mist. This is not something that everybody would run, but because of the aforementioned survivability like risks, I like having Blood Mist. Or alternatively, you can like swap in and out of it depending on the content that you're doing, right? If you're doing like more pushing or like bosses or whatever, then you can go into Blood Mist if you want. But if you're just like speed farming, you can definitely go for something else, like maybe Bone Prison just to get more resource generation or like cooldown reduction and whatnot. Next, these are very standard corpse stuff. Again, standard like barrier, damage, and like survivability, armor. We're not putting points into Skeletal Warrior Mastery because we're sacrificing warriors and the golem to have mages. So we have, of course, maxed out Skeletal Mage Mastery. This is just random 1 point here. Some extra damage, survivability, amplified damage, of course, standard. Decrepify down to the cooldown reduction, abhorrent decrepify, also extremely standard. More multipliers here. These two passives, these two dark passes are good to have. So whenever you have darkness skills equipped, it'll also increase your damage and movement speed, of course. Corpse Tendrils is very standard, very good. Also gives you vulnerable. A little bit of fortified. This is actually kind of a optional thing because if you're running the new catalyst in season 9, and I am actually filming this on a non-seasonal character, but for season 9, there's actually a catalyst if you run it, which can fortify you and heal you as well. So that just makes Necrotic Carapace a little bit less necessary, but I still have it here anyway, just for a little bit extra. And there's not that many other good points to go into anyway. Next, this is like standard stuff, increased damage for casting an ultimate, maxing out Soul Rift for lower cooldown, getting all the upgrades, and getting the minion stuff, especially Helmet Commander and Inspiring Leader, and then ending with Kalan's Edict right here. Now for Paragon, I'm gonna go through this even quicker. The boards are pretty standard. Let's start with my first board here. So Cult Leader, increased damage for having attack speed on your minions, and you want to cap it at 100% bonus attack speed. It's like a sweet spot to have, and going above that might not be as good, right? Next we have Flesh Eater, extremely standard. Frailty is good because it increases damage to cursed enemies, and I do have Decrepify on my bar, even though I'm also running Blood Moon Breaches. But this is just more consistent to have it on my bar. Next, Scent of Death is pretty strong because it gives you survivability and increased crit strike damage. Pretty well balanced. Now for glyphs, I am running Gravekeeper, Dead Razor for minions, and you want to put it in the minion related board, which is Cult Leader, to buff up your new minion nodes. Next we have Amplify for curse stuff, down here Eliminator, and then last but not least, Essence for increased crit strike damage, and you can, like, if you have extra points, you can also throw some into like extra dexterity here. And onto gear, and also a lot of this is still pretty standard as well. But anyhow, starting with the offensive stuff, the Hand of Naz is of course key to this build. You can't really get like great damage without it. And this drops for Duriel and Undariel, but you can just do them on Torment 1 and it should be relatively easy. But before then, you can still run some kind of minion build variant, or perhaps like a darkness dot build is pretty strong this season too. If you don't just end up playing that, you could run with that first. Next, for some other key items, Blood Moon Breaches is really good because this actually allows your cursed enemies to take a lot more damage. The summons having a chance to inflict curses, I don't think this is that consistent, which is why I have Decrepify on my bar, just for more consistent damage reduction and targeted, cursing, and also cooldown reduction more importantly. And the Blood Moon Breaches also drops from Duriel and Andariel, so you're kind of killing two birds with one stone by farming them. Moving on for another important unique, the Ring of Mendeln is very, very strong. You could actually get pretty strong even without Hand of Naz just by running Ring of Mendeln. I forgot to mention that earlier. But anyhow, this one actually drops from the Beast in Ice, so you want to farm that too. And then for some of the offensive aspects, you'll definitely want Service and Sacrifice here to combo with Hand of Naz, because this not only increases the damage of your Skeletal Mages, but also decreases the damage they take, allowing for them to more easily transition into Skeletal Archmages, right, by not dying and attacking a bunch. Moving on, for my amulet, I'm running Reanimation. This just gives you a straight up damage increase to your minions by staying alive. There's also Frenzied Dead, which increases like attack speed of your minions. You can run that as a filler, but that's not as useful anymore as long as you have enough attack speed on your character, because again, as I mentioned before, just by reaching 100%-ish bonus attack speed across your gear, you'll be able to get the maximum benefit out of Cult Leader. Next, Grasping Veins is also really good. This will give you just increased crit chance and crit damage. And then for my helm, I'm obviously running a mythic here. Again, this is a non-seasonal character, but for the helm, you can run like a legendary helm using the aphotic, I believe it's aphotic aspect. Anyhow, it's the aspect that causes your skeletal priest to also empower yourself, which results in like a greater multiplier across all of your minions. So that's another way to gain offense even on like a traditionally more defensive piece like your helm. For your chest, you definitely want hardened bones, just straight up strong survivability. For boots, you definitely want to run a cult dominion just to increase the number of mages that you have. Now for some other stuff, being your affixes, you want like Hellbent Commander on your amulet. You want enough attack speed, preferably up to around 100%. Get cult leader bonus. On your weapon, you want skeletal mages to attack twice rolled. The skeletal mage damage as your offensive affix because it's, as you can see, a really high roll it can get to, and you can roll that on your ring and your amulet as well. Oh, and speaking of which, the Ring of Mendon's attack speed, summon attack speed, should also contribute to your Paragon cult leader as well. So you definitely want to take that into account when trying to reach the 100% attack speed bonus. For runes, again, I do have some legendary runes here, so you can kind of swap out for whatever you have access to, but eventually getting more damage multipliers from them would be your best bet. You can perhaps try the Earthen Bulwark rune if you really need more barrier and survivability, but anyhow, for now I have Nagu Om, which is just by maintaining summons, you'll get Offering and you'll be able to use Warcry to buff up yourself and your minions really good. The other one for damage is just Cax Rune is pretty strong all around for lots of builds. You can perhaps, if you're not like pushing though, you can maybe use something different. Say again the Earthen Bulwark one, or maybe even something like reducing ultimate cooldown and whatnot. Oh yeah, of course for the Book of the Dead, it's Shadow Mages, which are the star of the show, and I'm taking the first upgrade here. Because whatever buff goes to you, in turn amplifies your summons, right? And then for the sacrifice, we've got Shadow or Reapers from the warrior side sacrifice, and then for the crit strike damage from the Golem, Iron Golem sacrifice. Last but not least, for some of the Horadric stuff, oh, and actually I'm gonna talk about mercenaries first. So I have Subo as the main mercenary. We're here with Bastion as my secondary. Subo is super standard, just take the increased critical strike damage here. Now, finally onto the new Season 9 Horadric like stuff, starting with the socketables, the gems. I like running this one called Horadric Crest for some extra damage and survivability, although you could definitely swap this out for something else too if you wish. Such as Idol from Below seems like a good one because it just gives you more damage, and like the enemy that it spawns will actually contribute to like pit progress. Anyhow, moving on, this is also really good for summons, so whenever you injure or kill an enemy, your summons get empowered greatly, so kind of a no-brainer again. And last but not least here, Scornful Light is also very standard, good, straightforward gem, just increases your damage, but does cause you to take slightly more damage, so use it at your own risk. And moving on to the spells down here, I like trying out Thunderous Particle because it deactivates suppressor effects, which is annoying for ranged attacks obviously, but you can, I've seen people running Smoldering Ember, so you can kind of pick and choose. You're not using this for damage anyway, but I think if you have Corpse Tendrils, you can also deactivate suppressor effects, so that might be enough. But this consistency with Thunderous Particle deactivating it just seems pretty appealing to me. Now for the like add-ons, they're very standard. It's Fractured Core for, again, deactivating damage resistance aura, and then Bloody Charm, super standard, actually also gives you attack speed, which should contribute to your cult leader, so also something to keep in mind. And then here I like Invigorating Helix for extra healing and fortify, so again, something that is lacking in this build is survivability, and this definitely helps a ton. For the spell, it's Cosmic Anomaly, bound to Corpse Tendrils. Alright, and that was my build guide for the Season 9 Skeletal Mage Summoner Necromancer. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and I'll be sure to reply to each and every comment. Also, consider subscribing and liking the video if you found it helpful, for more cutting edge guides in the future. Anyhow, thank you so much for watching, happy hunting, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.